What would it be like to be an academic scholar? You know, a professor at a university? Well, you are going to be treated to some of those answers by way of this great guest. Her name is Dr. Ingrid Handlovsky, and she's a professor at the University of Victoria in British Columbia, Canada. And she was kind enough to sit down and share some of her experiences, share some of the knowledge and information related to the work that she does. And we get into it. I mean, we get into some of the distinctions within being a professor, being an academic, whether you're research-based, whether you're teaching-based, or whether some of your work involves getting out into the community. So we get a really great look at that. We also have a look at, the day in the life. What are some of the roles and responsibilities? What are some of the things that pull her in different directions? And some of the rewards as well, some of the more meaningful moments of her day. So all up, we cover a lot of ground in this conversation, and I think it's going to give you a really great look at whether or not, a career within academia could be for you. Now, I do encourage you to check out the full-length audio version. There's just so much more that I get within there as opposed to within these videos, and you can find that wherever you access your podcast. Just do that search for Life as a ... All right, well, why don't we get into things? All right, well, this first clip I think is valuable in that it gives us this big picture look at being an academic scholar. And I think it just sets the tone for the rest of the conversation. So let's have a look at Ingrid explaining, at its core, what this profession is all about.
If you asked me about a scholar, I would envision this very serious looking person sitting in the armchair with one of those jackets with the patches,
Right.
smoking a pipe, considering deeply philosophical things. And I suppose to some degree, that's what scholars do. I think at the core of that, and as my colleague and friend shared with me, our job is to come up with ideas. And I love that because often our ideas are not successful. We're, continually attempting to get funding for things. And oftentimes we are not successful, and that can be really devastating. But at the end of the day, it's about coming up with those ideas. It's about maintaining that curiosity and engaging with the world and asking questions. And I think that definition there really captured, like, these are folks that are really interested in exploring questions, in understanding more about the world around us. And that's really what our work focuses on, and how that manifests. There's, as I know we had kind of talked briefly about this, but there's a real diversity in terms of how that scholarly position or academic position can be operationalized as a job, in a day-to-day sense. So the different roles people can find themselves in.
Okay, well, next up, we're going to get a nuts and bolts perspective on what it's like being an academic scholar. What is a day in the life like? And I really like this clip for a number of different reasons, but one is how Ingrid starts off by explaining, the distinctions in her work versus others. So have a listen to this.
What are you involved in? What types of duties, responsibilities are, the main ones that you're concerned with?
So I can start this off with just a really brief explanation of my role. I'm a research stream academic, which means that my job, at least in Canada, this tends to be how an academic position is designed. We often have teaching professors whose focus will then be on a scholarship of teaching. I'm a research stream faculty, so my job is literally divided into 40% research, 40% teaching, and 20% service. So one thing I really overlooked and didn't have awareness of was the amount of self-governance that is involved as in being an academic at a post-secondary institution. Like, faculty with in collaboration with our incredible admin staff are the folks that run the programs, literally that run the systems. It's very self-governed. So it ends up being a lot more of your time than you would think, the service, like being on committees and contributing. But so a day in my job depends on whether I'm on a non-teaching term or a teaching term. And so it's 3 terms a year. I have 2 teaching terms and then 1 non-teaching term. So right now on my non-teaching term, it is all strategy about being like attending to my research projects, writing, getting the publications out, getting the findings out from the work that we've done, meeting with research teams, meeting with my community partners, discussing how we're going to structure our next grant, the one that we're putting in the fall. So that's what my life looks like right now. On a non-teaching
Right.
term, it's basically blocks of writing and then meeting with my research teams and talking about where we're at in our research process. For our one project, we're finishing up analysis, and we've hammered out frameworks for our first 3 papers. And then, getting super strategic about this one's going to be written at this time, then this one, and this one. Everybody's doing things. But when I'm in a teaching term, teaching takes up a lot of time. I teach 2 courses per semester. So, if I'm teaching undergrad, I'm on campus, I'm in a classroom for 3 hours, engaging with students. Then afterwards, I might have meetings with students. And then every term I have service meetings throughout the month. So whether that's grad ed or our nursing council meetings, we have once a month. Additional meetings for other things. It's a lot of meetings.
Meetings, I'm hearing that word a few times over here.
Like some days are death by meeting, but your day can really get derailed though. You might, get a response from a journal. It's like, all right, we're going to accept this pending revisions. And then it completely is going to shift your priorities. If you hear back from a journal, that publication takes precedence over everything else. So it's like shift, move, out of the way, block time for this, like feverishly write up those revisions, get that out the door again, and hopefully you don't have to do another round.
Well, next up is a clip representing something called pathways. And basically the aim of this segment is to show how people make their way into their present day professions. And one of the things that I really like about it is it shows, this process that a lot of people go through where they self-analyze, they go back into their past, and they recognize some of the things that were inherent within their own personalities. And here's a clip of Ingrid explaining her curiosity and how that really kind of connected up to the world of science, the world of discovery, and ultimately academia. So check it out.
I'd love to know, your level of curiosity towards the world. I would assume, like that was probably there for you early on, and which might have, led you into academia. But maybe you could share that with listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. I joke around a lot that I am a curious human, and I arrived on this planet as a curious human. I was joking around having this conversation with a friend of mine just last week about how I had entertained a great variety of potential professions or occupations or ways that I was going to spend my life. And we laughed that I had briefly considered being a volcanologist at one point. She was like, the heck is that? Person who studies volcanoes. I'm fascinated by volcanoes. Composite shield. Oh man, there's so much to learn, so much to know. But I think what ultimately drove me to science was just a really innate curiosity as to like how things work. Like I always wanted to understand, but why? I think it drove my parents like bananas. But why? And I had the good fortune of being in the company of folks that could offer me some insights into that. My dad was really into quantum physics though, so that was just like taken up a notch. And probably things that were introduced that I couldn't follow it at all. But I think it also inspired an interest in space. And if I was better at math, maybe I would have pursued something in that line. But absolutely. I just think the world is such a fascinating place, and there are so many different ways to explore.
Now, after hearing about the finer details of what Ingrid's involved in, as well as some of the overarching aims of her work as an academic scholar, it would probably be helpful to hear about, some of her actual work that she's involved in. What is she sinking herself into? So here's a clip of Ingrid explaining her work and her studies.
And again, I've lightly introduced off the top, some of the things that you're involved with as far as your research. Namely, you really dig into issues related to health equity and examination of social structures that lead to poor outcomes for those from disadvantaged backgrounds. Now, maybe you could break that down for us in simpler terms, like what exactly you are involved with.
Absolutely. So health equity, I just always use it as a broad term because it positions me as somebody who's really interested in looking at the implications of our social environments and how our social environments inherent to things like, political, historical, social dynamics how that influences our day-to-day lives and our interactions, our access to things, everything, because we can't look at how somebody is feeling if we don't consider the context within which they live. We know this is all social determinants, right? So socioeconomic status, gender, if you look at the major ones, right? The implications those things have on how somebody feels. I'm in particularly, equity is a term that situates differences not as simply existing. So we would say disparities if we were just like, oh, so this group of people seem to have this health issue. That's just random. But actually, we can look at that overrepresentation of a particular health issue as the product of structural forces that are positioning this group they're really positioning them in terms of like contributing to disadvantage.
Now, in the heels of that last clip, I do want to show you one more that relates to the meaningfulness of this type of work, the true level of impact that one can have, and how this type of research can propel a lot of other types of learnings forward. So check this one out as well.
The kind of work that I do, I did a recent project where I talked with men who are self-identified as gay and are age 50 plus, who had lived through that pre-heart period of HIV/AIDS, so the pre-highly active antiretroviral therapy period where there's certain groups that were really disadvantaged, and the infection is really steeped in stigma, and it's not to diminish the fact that there were other groups of people too that were really overrepresented in terms of disadvantage during that time, but gay men were really conflated with the infection, and there was a tremendous amount of just derogatory media discourse, really horrible things, and no organized public health response or support of any kind. So there was a lot of suffering and death. And I talked to people about their experiences during that time to understand how going through something like this as a collective trauma can potentially influence your current perspectives on quality of life, like what that means for how you value the things in your life and the sort of implications that has for your wellness.
All right, well, I do have one more clip that I want to show you today, and it involves this spillover from the professional sphere into the personal sphere. And I think this is a really insightful look at the work itself and the kind of impact that it can have on you as a professional, as you as an individual. So check this one out as well.
Being so deeply engaged within your work, and invariably, you're going to probably have some fairly strong opinions on particular subject matter. Now, the question here is when some of those opinions that you hold are very different than, say, what's within the public sphere, what the general public is feeling about a particular issue or topic. And, what is that like? How do you reconcile those differences, and how do you hold it in, I suppose, at times, even having conversations in your personal life with friends or colleagues or people who are outside of the work that, that you're doing? How is that aspect of it all?
It's been a really disheartening year with things like Roe versus Wade, with a lot of vaccination conversations, with a lot of accusatory comments around vaccination and governance, and looking at what's happening in other parts of the world where there are true autocracies and people are really suffering and dying. And a lot of things. And so I have the good fortune of having wonderful friends and colleagues where we can have those conversations in safe spaces. And you can get some of that out, because sometimes you just need to and I also run for sanity. That really helped me. But that's actually been something that I've really had to work on, because it's there's finite, I love the Barack Obama, finite energy. So you need to be really mindful about where that energy is being expended. And me being angry, I've talked to students about this, me being really angry about stuff all the time is not facilitative. If I can channel that and write a grant and get funded and do some great work with it, awesome. But that's
not how it works usually.
Not really. So there's different creative outlets that are very helpful to navigate that, and just being very mindful about where I am positioned and why I am positioned.
Yeah, I really like the sentiment contained within that last clip. It really is that kind of dose of reality in terms of some of the impacts that the career can have on the personal side of things. And to be fair, Ingrid did go on and explain a lot of the fulfilling moments and things that she derives from the work itself. Now, I do encourage you to check that out and a bunch more within the full-length audio version. Again, there's just so much more covered there. We get into issues like funding, which is a big part of being an academic scholar. We also look at technology, mentorship, and a host of other things. So again, you can check that out wherever you access your podcast. Just do that search for Life as a ... And while I do have your attention here, I would appreciate a like or subscribe. Again, it's the only way that this content, that YouTube knows to push this content out to others. And again, I could be biased here, but I think it matters, right? I mean, this type of information could be useful. It could set somebody up for the next 30, 40 years of their life. So yeah, a like or subscribe would be really appreciated. Well, I think we are drawing to a close here, but I do encourage you to keep an eye out for the next episode. It will be coming out right next week. All right, well, until then, I'll see you later.